Good day, this is Q from Golden Circle Games, and we're going to talk about my own personal deck, which I've been refining and playing for a long time. I'm really looking forward to showing you this deck and what I've done with it. The Naga tribe relied on a single river to provide them water, but a distant battle between unrelated parties resulted in the pollution of their well with dark magic. Imoti, possessed to the blessing of the god of nature, was the only one who could purify the water so the tribe could be sustained. They wanted to elevate her for her efforts, but she refused, choosing instead to dedicate her life to protecting the river and purifying the water, leaving the rule of the tribe to those who were better suited. Imoti is 3 and a Simic for a 3/1 Naga Druid with Cascade. She imbues all spells with mana cost greater than 6 with Cascade as well. So when you cast a spell with Cascade, you exile cards off the top of your library until you exile a non-land permanent with lesser converted mana cost, and then you may cast that spell without paying its mana cost. The aim of the deck is really to play big splashy spells which will cascade hopefully into one another like a waterfall. We win the game by combat damage, using extra turns to play as many creatures and spells from our deck before swinging with an army and overwhelming our opponents with value. The deck list can be found in the description below, and the cost is, at the time of this video, about $500 or €300. Our first ramp spell is Wood Elves. When Wood Elves enters the battlefield, search your library for a forest card, put that card onto the battlefield, and then shuffle your library. That will get us our Rimewood Falls, our breeding pool, and also give us a body on the field for protection, for blocking. Which is pretty good. Springbrood Druid is similar, but when it enters the battlefield, you sacrifice a land. If you do, search your library for 2 basic lands, put them into the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. Farseek, search your library for plains, island, swamp, or mountain, and put it into the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. It doesn't get a forest, but it will get us our breeding pool and our Rimewood Falls. Cultivate, search your library for 2 basic land cards, reveal those cards, put one onto the battlefield tapped and the other into your hand, then shuffle. Nature's Law, search your library for a forest card, put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Then we've got Rampant Growth, search your library for a basic land card and put that card onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. 3 Visits, search your library for a forest card, put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Harrow, as an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a land, search your library for up to 2 basic lands, put them onto the battlefield, untap, then shuffle your library. And then we've got Boundless Realms, which will trigger our Imoti for a cascade, and that says search your library for X basic land cards, where X is the number of land cards you control, then put them onto the battlefield tapped, and shuffle your library. Our first and only adventure card for the deck, Fertile Footsteps, the sorcery side of it. Search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, untap, then shuffle your library. And then later on we can cast Beanstalk Giant for and cause Cascade. When it enters the battlefield, its power and toughness are equal to the number of lands you control. Soul Ring, tap to add an additional 2 colourless mana. Arcane Signet, tap to add mana of any colour in your commander's identity. Simic Signet, tap to add Simic. You have to pay 1 into that though. Great Henge, that triggers Cascade. The spell costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power amongst creatures you control. You tap it to add 2 mana and gain 2 life, and when a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a 1/1 counter on it and draw a card. There's a lot of words, and most of the time we're getting a saving at least 3 for our commander, because we want to cast this after our commander comes out. So we have a card draw spells, Garruk's Uprising. Whenever Garruk's Uprising enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. Creatures you control have trample, and whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. Guardian Project, whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it doesn't have the same name as another creature you control, or a creature in your graveyard, you draw a card. Then Zendakar's Resurgent, whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana on your pool of any type that land produced, and then whenever you cast a creature spell, you draw a card. All of the this one triggers our Cascade and doubles our mana as well as drawing us cards. Turn of the Wild Speaker, choose one. Draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control. Only a couple of humans in this deck. Non-human creatures you control get +3/+3 to the end of turn. So possibly a win con there. AC Tyrant of Gaia Strait. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. Karuga the Macro Sage. When Karuga enters the battlefield, draw a card for each other permanent you control with converted mana cost 3 or greater. Start with the interaction. There's not a lot of interaction in the deck because we don't really want to cascade into it, but we do have some, and we start with Duplicant. When Duplicant enters the battlefield, you may exile a target non-token creature. As long as the card exiled with Duplicant is a creature card, Duplicant has the power and toughness and the creature types of the last creature exiled with Duplicant, and it's still a shapeshifter. We've got Beast Within. Destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green beast creature token. Most of our creatures are bigger than that, so it's not a problem for us. Counter spell, counter target spell really. We've got Plasm Capture, counter target spell at beginning of next pre-combat main phase. Add X mana in the combination of colours to your mana, in any combination of colours to your mana pool, and where X is that spell's converted mana cost. Flood of Tears, return all non-land permanents to their owner's hand. If you return 4 or more non-token permanents this way, you may put a permanent from your hand onto the battlefield. That will trigger Cascade as well. River's Rebuke, return all non-land permanents target player controls to their owner's hand. It's kind of a one-person Cyclonic Rift just to get rid of a problem player. And that also triggers Cascade. Mockery of Nature has a merge for 7 and green. You may cast a spell by sacrificing a creature and paying the emerge cost reduced by that creature's converted mana cost. When you cast Mockery of Nature, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment. This is going to cascade. It's going to cascade for the mana cost at the top 9 or 8 or less. So even with the emerge cost, it's still going to cascade for that. Then we're going to Terastodon. When Terastodon enters the battlefield, you may destroy up to 3 target non-creature permanents. For each permanent put into a graveyard this way, its controller creates a 3/3 green elephant creature token, and that also triggers our Cascade. Khan's Temporal Sundering, we can't cast it unless we control a legendary, but when we do, we get to take an extra turn after this one and return up to 1 target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, and then we exile Khan's Temporal Sundering. Now, these are the spells I'm generally mostly excited about playing because they're the ones that people look at and go, it does what now? Abundance, if you would draw a card, you may instead choose a land or non-land and reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a card of chosen kind. Put that card into your hand and then all others revealed this way on the bottom of your library in any order. And this is great because it stops us from drawing out. We do draw an awful lot of cards in this deck, it's pretty good for stopping us milling out. And then we have Dig Through Time, which has Delve. Each card you exile from your graveyard while casting the spell pays for 1, so we could potentially cast this for 2 blue mana, and Cascade for 6, 7 or less. Look at the top 7 of cards of your library, put 2 of them into your hand and the rest in the bottom of your library. Good way of searching through your deck there. Chroma's Memorial, 7 mana for creatures, giving your creatures flying, first strike, vigilance, trample, haste and protection from black and from red. And Dig Through Time and Chroma's Memorial will cascade. Seaborn Muse, untap all permanents you control during each player's untap step. We do have flash in this deck. We do have a way of giving our creatures flash, so that's great for playing on other people's turns. Teferi, Major Zalfir, flash. Creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield have flash. Each opponent can't cast spells, can only cast spells anytime he or she could play a sorcery. Thrix's Sudden Storm. That's flash, flying. Spells you cast with converted mana cost 5 or greater cost 1 less to cast. And this is the bit that nobody ever seems to read. It says and can't be countered. So our 5 or more greater spells can't be countered, which means it's very difficult for them to react to us. So sometimes it's good to cast Thrix before you cast Teferi, because then Teferi can't be countered, and people generally look at you, go, I'm going to counter Teferi, and then you say, well, yeah, I've got Thrix out. We have Yaver, Nature's Herald, flash. You may cast green creature cards as though they had flash. A lot of our cards are green, a lot of our creatures are green. And then we have Asceticism. Creatures you control can't be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control, so it's kind of hexproof. And then we can tap 1 and a green, regenerate target creature. And then Wilderness Reclamation, at the beginning of your end step, untap all lands you control, so we can get those flashes off in the next turn. Then we have Nylia, Keen-Eyed, is indestructible as long as your devotion is less than 5. Nylia isn't a creature, not very difficult in this deck to get there. Creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, which is really good for this deck. And a bit of filtering off the top, 2 and a green, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, put it into your hand, otherwise you may put it into your graveyard. Crewfix, God of Horizons, indestructible as long as your devotion to green or blue is less than 7. Again, not too difficult to get there. Crewfix isn't a creature, and you have no maximum hand size, so as we're drawing a lot of cards, we're going to be able to keep those in our hands, and if unused mana would empty from your mana pool, that mana becomes colourless instead, and then we can store it on Crewfix so it doesn't empty during the passing of turns, and we can use that mana later on to cast bigger and better spells. We've got Artisan of Kozilek. When you cast a spell, you can return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and it has Annihilated 2. And then we've got Eternal Witness. When Eternal Witness enters the battlefield, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand. Kogler, when it enters the battlefield, you can fight up to 1 target creature you don't control, and then when the Kogler attacks, destroy target artifact or enchantment. Some decent removal there, but the key target is this 1 and a green, return target human you control to its owner's hand, and then Kogler gains indestructible to the end of turn. And with Eternal Witness, we can use that to return one of our key spells from the graveyard, which is generally Time Warp, and we can use that for infinite extra turns and possibly a win con. Moving on to our splashy spells now, we've got Archetype of Endurance. Creatures you control have hexproof, creatures your opponents control lose hexproof and can't have or gain hexproof. Then we've got Archetype of Imagination. Creatures you control have flying, creatures your opponents control lose flying and can't have or gain flying. That allows us to get through with our creatures and swing and kill people. Armanatu's Augury, which is a real powerful card in the deck. exile the top 8 cards in your library. You may put a land card from among them onto the battlefield. Until the end of the turn, for each non-land type you may cast a card of that type among the exiled cards without paying their mana costs. And that's a cast trigger, so we are casting those spells, so we are triggering hopefully quite a few times our Imoti and our Cascade triggers. Doglane Regent, when it enters the battlefield you become the Monarch, means you draw a card at the end of the turn, and then as long as you're the Monarch, permanents you control have hexproof. That's also going to trigger our Cascade. Galta, Primal Hunger, you can Galta costs X less to cast, where X is the total power of the creatures you control. I've never cast this for more than 2 green. It has Trample, pretty good card in the deck. Jadzi, Oracle of Arcavios, discard a card, return Jadzi to its owner's hand. Basically a good way of protecting itself. And then whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a non-land card, you may cast it by paying 1 rather than paying its mana cost, and if it's a land card, put it into the battlefield untapped. So it's just works with every synergy we want it to work with. We get lands, we get free spells off the top. Well, they're 1 mana for a 12 mana spell, and they are cascading as well, so they work really well with our deck as well. Kodama of the East Tree as reach. Whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, if it wasn't put into the battlefield with this ability, you may put a permanent card with equal or lesser converted mana cost from your hand onto the battlefield. Those 2, 3, 4 mana spells I might have in my hand, I don't want to cast those. I want to put them into play through some other trigger, because I want to cast my big splashy spells, so that's there for that. Nezahal Primal Tide, this spell can't be countered. You have no maximum hand size. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, draw a card, and then you can discard 3 cards and protect Nezahal by blinking out of existence until the end step. Nyxboom Ancient, it has Trample, and if you tap a permanent for mana, it produces 3 times that amount of mana instead. So we've got big splashy spells, we need to cast them. Tripling our mana is pretty a good way of doing that. Sakashima's Protege as Flash, Cascade, so that's going to double cascade when this is cast. You may have Sakashima's Protege enter the battlefield as a copy of any permanent that enters the battlefield this turn. So copy your opponent's biggest, baddest creatures, or even copy one of your own creatures. Sphinx of the Second Sun is a pretty good creature to copy actually, and it has flying at the beginning of your post-combat main phase. You get an additional beginning phase after this phase, so you get an untap, upkeep, and draw step at the beginning, at the end of your second main phase. Thraster Tempest Roar. This costs 3 less to cast for each other spell you've cast this turn. In a Cascade deck, that's not too difficult to cast this just for 2 green mana, and it has Trample, Haste, Trample over Planeswalkers as well. A bit of a unique card for this, and Thraster Tempest Roar has hexproof as long as it enters the battlefield this turn, so when it comes in it's very difficult to handle. We've got Auron's Epiphany. Create 2 1/1 bird creature tokens with flying, and take an extra turn after this one, and we'll exile Auron's Epiphany. We can foretell it for a 2 mana or a 1 mana saving on the cost of this spell. Generally it's okay to do that, not really a problem to do that. Might help with some of those discard decks, having something like this in exile for a time. And then we have Mnemonic Deluge. Exile target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard, copy that card 3 times. You may cast the copies without paying their mana costs, and you exile Mnemonic Deluge. We can exile our Auron's Epiphany, we can exile our extra turn spells, and get 3 copies of those, and win the game hopefully off the back of that. So it's a big spell that in itself cascades, but also gets you some pretty busted cards out of your graveyard that you've already cast this game. So other than our infinite extra turns, the ways we plan to win it is through creature damage. We get our extra turn spells, we get a few extra turn spells in the game, and then we'll get something like Beastmaster Ascension, where whenever a creature you control attacks, you may put a quest counter on it. We want 7 or more quest counters on it. Gives all our creatures +5/+5. So we cast that as and when we have a chance, when we have 7 or more creatures on the field, and we give them all +5/+5 and swing when we swing. We've got something like Overwhelming Stampede until the end of the turn. Creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X, where X is the greatest power amongst creatures you control. And then we have Enray's Forerunners, where when it enters the battlefield, other creatures you control get +2/+2, gain vigilance and trample to the end of turn. It also has vigilance, trample, and haste. So these spells can overwhelm our opponents with the power and toughness of our creatures, and win the game from there. And then there's Nexus of Fate. Take an extra turn after this one. If Nexus of Fate will be put into a graveyard from anywhere, reveal Nexus of Fate and shuffle it into its owner's library. A little bit of mill protection. Also, because we're drawing so many cards, we may very well find that Nexus of Fate ends up being the last card in their deck, and we can get a few extra turns off of that. It's pretty good because every time you cast it, it just goes back into the library, and you can just keep casting it. And then we're on to the lands, where really most of our power comes from. We've got Alchemist's Refuge, add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool, or pay Simic and cast non-land permanents as though they had flash. Another way of giving our stuff flash, so we can cast stuff on opponents' turns. Bark Channel Pathway, it taps for either a green or a blue depending on what side we play it on. It's a bit of mana fixing. Blighted Woodland, add a colourless, and then we can pay 3 and a green to get 2 basic land cards into the battlefield tapped, and this comes in untapped itself. So we have a fetchable land, Breeding Pool. It's a forest island. Enters the battlefield, you may pay 2 life. If you don't, Breeding Pool enters tapped. Castle Garenbrig enters the battlefield tapped unless we control a forest. Taps for a green, but we can pay 2 and 2 green to add 6 mana. Spend this mana to cast only creature spells or activate abilities of creatures. And then we have Dreamroot Cascade enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other islands. Command Tower, add 1 mana of any colour in your commander's colour identity. Evolving Wilds, sacrifice Evolving Wilds, search your library for a basic land card, put it into the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Exotic Orchard, tap, add 1 mana of any colour a land an opponent controls would produce. This is never not tapped for my own colours. Field of Ruin, tap, add colourless or pay 2. Tap, sacrifice Field of Ruin, destroy target non-basic land and opponent controls. Each player may search their library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield. It's going to benefit your opponents a little bit, but sometimes just getting rid of that busted land is the best thing you can do. Homeward Path, tap to add 1 mana of 1 colourless mana to your mana pool, or you tap, each player gains control of the creatures he or she owns, gets your commander back, gets your creatures back. Then we have Misted Rainforest, pay 1 life, sacrifice Misted Rainforest, search your library for a forest or an island, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle land fetching. Mirrored Landscape enters the battlefield tapped, tap, add 1 colourless, pay 2, sacrifice Mirrored Landscape, search your library for 2 basic land cards that share the same land type. Opal Palace, add 1 colourless if you tap it, or you pay 1, tap it, add 1 mana of any colour in your commander's colour identity. If you spend that mana to cast your commander, it enters the battlefield with a number of additional 1/1 counters on it. Very useful with a commander that's a 3/1, a great way of protecting it if it keeps getting removed from the game, especially if people have got like 1/1 pingers. And then we've got Rejuvenating Springs, enter the battlefield tapped unless you have 2 or more opponents, and that taps for our Simic colours. Reliquary Tile, you have no maximum hand size, tap, add 1 colourless. Rhinewood Falls, another fetchable land, forest and island. Rhinewood Fall then enters the battlefield tapped, and it taps for our Simic colours. Simic Growth Chamber enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, return a land you control to your hand, and it taps for Simic. We have Temple of Mystery. Enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, you get to scry 1. Taps for our Simic. Terramorphic Expanse, sacrifice it. Search your library for a basic land card, put it into the battlefield tapped. Yavimaya Coast, tap, add 1 colourless, or you tap for Simic and it deals 1 damage to you. And finally, we've got 10 forests and 6 basic islands. Thanks so much for watching our video. Deck list is in the description below. Please like, subscribe, comment. If you wish to have a look at Moxfield, our other deck lists on Moxfield, please see the links below. We also have links below for our Discord. Come play games with us, come enjoy some Commander games, and we welcome any players of all different walks of life. So welcome to you, and we look forward to seeing you in our Discord or in our next video. Good luck and goodbye.